Today, the term awful can refer to anything from a very lousy dinner to a catastrophic calamity that kills millions. However, when it was bestowed on Russian King Ivan IV in the 16th century, it explicitly meant horrific, mighty, and fearsome. However, if we look at the reign of one of the most paranoid, violent, and unpredictable men to control the country, then the modern term of very awful isn't so far off the mark after all. So, what was it that made Ivan so awful? Ivan's unhappy childhood sowed the seeds of the dreadful person he would become. Ivan's father, Vasily, the Grand Prince of Moscow, died when he was 3 years old, and his mother died when he was 8 years old. The young prince was then the target of power battles between numerous noble houses, particularly the strong Shuisky and Bolesky families. While the royal court devolved into a perilous maelstrom of murder and intrigue, Ivan and his deaf-mute brother Yuri were treated like street urchins. There were moments when Ivan and his younger brother were left in rags and on the verge of famine. "My brother Yuri of hallowed memory and I were raised as vagrants and destitute children," Ivan said in a letter to his close friend Prince Andrei Kurbsky. "What have I suffered for a lack of clothing and food?" Ivan mistrusted the nobility as a result of his neglect and treatment as a political football, which evolved into blinding hatred as he grew older. When he became Tsar, his cruelty would come back to haunt Ivan's noble relatives in spectacular fashion. But that was all in the future. Ivan took his rage and bitterness out on animals instead of his tormentors, tearing the feathers out of living birds and throwing dogs and cats out of windows. Grabbing power. Ivan finally bared his teeth at the age of 13. The powerful Shuisky family was by this time the de facto rulers of Russia, having defeated the Boleskis in their power struggle for control of the prince. They hadn't counted on the youngster they'd ignored and tortured for so long. Ivan accused the most powerful of the Shuiskys, Prince Andrei, of mismanaging the realm at a feast in 1453 and had him arrested and executed. Some believe Andrei was ripped apart by ravenous hunting dogs, but a more believable story is that Andrei was beaten to death by his jailers. On his 16th birthday, Ivan was given complete power. He married his first wife, Anastasia, 2 weeks later. There was nothing particularly heinous about Ivan's early reign. It was indeed a period of relative calm and progress. He instituted reforms such as an update to his grandfather's penal code, the development of a permanent army, and the implementation of regional self-governance. Following his conquest of the Tatar area of Kazan, Ivan also introduced the first printing presses into Russia and ordered the construction of the beautiful St. Basil's Cathedral. According to legend, Ivan was so taken with the finished cathedral that he had the architect blinded so he could never construct something as beautiful again. There is no evidence that the blinding actually occurred, but it is a measure of Ivan's reputation that many people are still willing to believe he was capable of such a heinous and barbaric deed. Becoming the Terrible. Two occurrences, in 1558 and 1560, pushed Ivan over the line, transforming him from a tolerable ruler into a full-fledged dictator. The first was his close buddy Prince Kurbsky's betrayal. During Ivan's failed attempt to seize the Baltic state of Livonia in 1558, the nobleman defected to the Lithuanians. Kurbsky seized command of the Lithuanian army and, with the assistance of forces from Poland and Sweden, gave Russia a setback that left Ivan furious and more convinced than ever that his country's nobility was out to get him. The loss of his beloved wife Anastasia in 1560 was the second event. Ivan was convinced that his enemies had poisoned his wife. While no evidence of poison could be detected at the time, a 20th century investigation of the Tsarina's bones revealed exceptionally high levels of mercury, showing that the paranoid young king was correct for once. Ivan's first reaction to his wife's death and his friend's betrayal was to flee Moscow for Alexandrov, a village 120 kilometers northeast of the Russian capital. He announced his desire to abdicate in 2 letters. His council of nobles and clergy attempted to rule in his absence, but when this proved impossible, an ambassador was dispatched to persuade Ivan to reconsider. He agreed to do so on the condition that he be granted the authority to seize the lands of those who had betrayed him and to execute anyone he suspected of treason. Ivan's demands were accepted by the desperate council and clergy. It was to be a costly mistake. Oprichnina. Ivan returned to Moscow and began the process of dividing the country into 2 administrative zones. One would be ruled by the nobles, while the other, known as the Oprichnina, would be ruled by Ivan in any way he saw proper. This, it turned out, entailed torturing and executing the great majority of his political opponents and pretty much anyone else who got in his way. Ivan established the Oprichniki to police his new realm. The Oprichniki, who wore all black, were Ivan's personal bodyguards and enforcers who traveled the newly acquired region performing the Tsar's bidding. Ivan gave the Oprichniki free access to torture and murder anyone he suspected of treachery. The Oprichniki, a gang of professional thugs despised and dreaded by everyone in the Oprichnina, rode around with severed dog heads affixed to their saddles to symbolize the snuffing out of traitors. As word spread that the Oprichniki were in the area, it became common to see peasants, middle classes and upper classes fleeing for their lives in the Oprichnina's towns and villages. The Oprichniki were merciless. Anyone Ivan suspected of disloyalty was tortured and brutally executed. Boiling alive, impalement, being cooked over an open fire, or being torn limb from limb by horses were all popular ways of death. To live in the territory dominated by Ivan and the Oprichniki was to live in constant fear. The Novgorod Massacre. Ivan authorized an assault on the city of Novgorod in 1570, convinced the city's officials, clergy and most notable inhabitants were conspiring against him and were not subscribed to our channel. So, please do. Priests and monks were arrested and beaten to death while their churches and monasteries were looted. Prominent merchants, officials and nobles were tortured and executed, and many were burned alive in specially built frying pans. While these unfortunates died slowly and agonizingly, their wives and children fared no better. They were collected up, tied up, and thrown into the Volkhov River. Those who attempted to flee were driven beneath the frigid waters and drowned by soldiers armed with boat hooks, spears, and axes. Lower-level merchants were targeted by the Oprichniki, who were given orders to take all profitable products and burn storehouses and stores. Anyone who attempted to resist, as well as many who did not, were killed. Poor people fared no better. The city was teeming with homeless peasants looking for work as a result of a series of famines that had ravaged the region in recent years. These wretched souls, together with the evicted merchants and their families, were cast out to the city and left to freeze and starve to death in the hard Russian winter. Overall, the orgy of slaughter and destruction perpetuated on Novgorod killed an estimated 12,000 of its residents. The city was so damaged by the invasion that it ceased to be Russia's second city, with its administrative and religious facilities demolished, influential individuals killed, its commercial center a gutted shell, and the majority of its wealth seized. The majority of the remaining populace evacuated the ruins in search of a better life elsewhere. It would take generations for Novgorod to fully recover from the attack, and it would never be a contender to Moscow again. Novgorod was simply one of many examples of Ivan's ruthless conquest tactics throughout the long years of his ruthless leadership. The Novgorod tragedy proved to be the Oprichniki's final moment in the spotlight. Ivan's crushing paranoia had already caused him to suspect its commanders of plotting against him before the city's sacking and an attack on Moscow by the Tatars that the Oprichniki were unable to withstand convinced Ivan that they were not as faithful as they claimed. In 1571, the organization was abolished, and many of its leaders were hanged. The Oprichnina area was dissolved in 1572, and the mere utterance of the word became a capital offense punishable by death. Ivan's constant warmongering, brutalization of his own people, attacks on the clergy, nobility, and middle classes, torturing and executing anyone who opposed him, and plundering the nation's wealth eventually brought the Russian economy to its knees, and things did not improve as Ivan aged and his mental health deteriorated even more. One of his most heinous deeds occurred in 1581 when he encountered his heavily pregnant daughter-in-law in nakedness and beat her so violently that she miscarried. Ivan's second son approached his father after learning of the loss of his newborn child. Ivan, who usually carried a sharpened baton with him, which he used to beat anyone who annoyed him, whacked his son over the head so hard that he collapsed and died a few days later. Nobody was safe from Ivan the Terrible, not even his own family. Ivan died at the age of 53 from a stroke while playing chess with a close friend in 1584. His kingdom was passed down to his middle son, a feeble-minded fool named Fyodor, who died childless in 1598, plunging Russia into a period of lawlessness and anarchy known as the Time of Troubles. Thank you for watching today's video, and if you did enjoy it, subscribe and watch this video to learn about terrorizing real-life horror stories.